Hey students, we're back. We're gonna review a little bit today because we just finished the third zero elevation, just basically to explain it to you again without all the head descriptions. But what I want to know is how would you diagram that? The one that we just did, the zero elevation. And as you know, you would take your question mark, number 1, number 2, you always have the ear, subsection at the parietal line, flat part of the head, and then center back. All right, what we did was we pie-shaped, brought that straight down, and we cut it straight across. So let me do another one over here, and I'm going to turn my body for you to see it. So that would be the side of the head. So there's your parietal line, right? Let's put the ears in there. And then we've got our flat part of the head, and then we did a subsection center part. Subsectioned again, and we brought this hair straight down. We cut it straight across. This last hair here, this was cut straight across. This last hair becomes our guide for this hair. This hair now is cut, and we start going at a slight angle to start traveling around the head form. Then we would do the same thing on the other side, subsections of about a 1/2 inch, as we bring it down to travel to that area above the nape line. The nape line starts at the tip of the ear, travels down, and comes back up. All right, that's your nape line. I know it looks kind of messy. You got to do your own diagrams. All right, so these would then travel around so that you're traveling around the head form. Everything comes down. When you finally get off to the side of the head, right here where everything has traveled down and you traveled around the head form, it's horizontal at the center back, angled on each side. See it? Now we get horizontal again because this is flat. All right, that's the why. So these are then, this last haircut becomes your guide for this area. You're going to take a subsection in that form. You're not going to drop down the whole flat part of the head. You're just going to take a subsection down, and you're going to bring it down, cut it, bring it down, cut it, bring it down, cut it. Now, as you drop these down, this line that you just cut becomes your guide. You can see it, and it's traveled around the head. As you part it down the center, you let it fall into its natural fall. You let it fall into its natural fall, and everything comes down, and that perimeter line on the bottom of the head form becomes your guide. So you would know to just let everything fall down naturally, in other words. And then that's how you would cut it. The area of concern would be the front, and you don't necessarily want to pull that hair back. You want it to fall down, and it's all natural fall to do that with. I explained why you wouldn't do that during the video, but learn how to diagram it. Learn how to write it down. If you write it down, you remember it. What we're going to do right now is we're going to do the graduated haircut. The graduated haircut is just basic layers is what it is. More in the front. Does a lot of what's called face framing. It's a natural face framing that ends up happening. And you can clean it up depending on what the client wants. When you bring hair to one spot, anytime, this is the geometry of it. When you bring it to one spot and cut it at that one stationary, it's called a stationary guide, that spot, in other words, it stays there. With the zero, we traveled around the head, but everything came down to that same spot as we traveled once we created that arc. With the graduated cut, we're going to determine how much length do we want off. Okay, the graduated cut creates also the V haircut in the back. It's the same haircut. Just depends on how much hair you want to pull over to do it. But you can almost create a perfect V without standing behind them and trying to cut that V in there. It will create a nice line for you to then clean up afterwards. Okay, so if we want to create, we're not going to be able to get a perfect V haircut out of this. And let me write that down. This is a graduated. Haircut. Or the V haircut. And this is going to be, I think, our second or third video on it. We'll look it up to see, but I believe it's a second video. Second video on the graduated or V haircut. Now, this is what you've got to look at for a V haircut. If I were to take, see, because the V, if I were to do a perfect V, the V would be back here, right? That would V out. Okay, so if this hair in the front is going to all fall in and V into that, I want you to see something. The hair at the nape, I'd have to cut this hair to the scalp to make a perfect V from the sides to the front. That's not going to happen. So where we're going to create our V, pretty much, is going to be right at the area behind the ear, and then we're going to take a guide on this side to make that V out a bit. So we're going to move our guide back when we do it. If hair is really, really long, like let's say hair is down past their bra strap, it's not impossible that you could create that V as long as they don't mind layers in the front. See, the point about making it a V here, it's got to travel to the front so that it's a perfect V coming back. Most people don't have it V'd out in the front. They have it all one length, and then it V's out in the back. So it just, all of this again is personal preference. If they want a V haircut in the back and they don't mind layers in the front, then it works out really, really well. In the book, it's called a graduated haircut. The reason it's called graduated, it's because it's gradual layers off the front, right here. You determine, you ask your client, where do you want your layers to start? Well, most people want them to start at the jawline. So we're going to take a pie shaping right at the frontal area, right to the apex line, almost to the parietal line, and we're going to bring it forward. So we're going to say, so you want it there. You're going to show your client, that's how much length I'm going to be taking off this area. Many times they say, oh, that's too much. Bring it out. Is that better? But then that's going to rest on your shoulders. Are you okay with that? That's communicating with your client, because that's going to be that first layer that she's going to have. Some of them may want it shorter where they have bangs and it falls here. That's not impossible. So that's how you determine. You're going to be pointing your fingers vertically down. All right? So what I'm going to do is, now, and there's variables here, okay? If they want more length and they don't really want a lot of layers, you can also just bring it down and cut it. Do you see? Let me show you at an angle. You can bring it down. The nose is then your guide. See it? So all this hair is going to be brought to that point. All of it's going to travel to that. So no matter where you choose it, does she want it here? Okay. But the fingers are still going to be pointed straight down. If you point the fingers horizontally, you're going to get some lines across the hair that are going to be very visible. So you have to be very careful about that. So these are different areas in hair cutting. Now, if you get lines, there are ways to fix it. We're going to be learning that in another video. But, so I'm going to bring this forward, and we're just going to trim her down to the jawline. And you notice that I have not sectioned the hair out. I've left it alone. Now, one thing you can do if you're nervous about this is put it into 4 quadrants. In other words, part it down the center, part it down the center back, and 4 quadrants means 4 sections, 4 quads in other words. It just means 4 sections. And then again, on this side, okay, there we are, right there. And then we're going to take this, and it may be off just a bit, but we're not going to worry about it, but try and get it as clean as you can. Doing these videos makes things a little bit more complicated. So I know that those are separated, all right? So I'm going to take this hair right here. I'm going to subsection it from the apex almost to the parietal line. Do you see that? The parietal line is right here, right there, okay? Right at the curve of the head. So I'm going to bring this forward. We want to just, I think I'm just going to take off maybe about 4 inches total. And I'm going to cut it vertically. My guide is right here, the center nose. I'm not moving it out in that direction. It's coming to the center of the face. In other words, the nose, if you look at it, becomes your guide. Take that off. Pie shape it again, diagonal parts. Bring it forward. And if you can't see your guide, you've grabbed too much hair. There's my guide. And then I'm going to pie shape it again, or diagonal part, and I'm going to show it to you. There's my part. See, it's not clean, it's not horizontal, it's a slight diagonal. So I'm going to bring that forward, and you see now where there's less hair coming off, because this hair now is traveling to this perimeter line. This is the shortest hair. The hair travels, gets longer. Now I'm going to bring up the whole section on the flat part of the head because I don't have a lot of hair right there, and there's nothing to cut. Didn't have enough hair to cut, but do you see that layering? So if this line right here travels all the way to the back, do you see then how you would have a V? Now, keep in mind, perimeter line makes a big difference. I want to show you something. You see this area right here. All right, I want you to see what happens with it. This is what you go and clean up. See it? That's it right there. And I'm actually going to pull it out for you to see where it's at. Right there. Exact same spot right here that created that slight corner when I pulled it forward. All right, to reach. Now what I'm going to do on the other side to show you what I'm talking about as far as if you do it horizontally, the difference that you're going to see. So on this side, again, subsection it, but this time still at the center nose. I'm going to take a little bit of hair off the other side so I have a guide, but the center nose, and I'm going to cut it horizontally. All right? Now see the extended position. All right? You're going to see a much harder line, again, parting it, diagonally, bringing it up to the same spot right there, cutting it horizontally. Now, are you seeing that hard line come up? It's not soft. It's not as accommodating as the other one. And you still end up with this little corner that is right there. There it is. And it's right there at the same spot because you've brought it forward. And you have a stationary guide, so it's going to pick up the lines from the perimeter line as it falls down. Do you see that? Now this goes in, so this comes out. See it? That goes in, comes out. Those are factors. That's the geometry in hair cutting. So when we do this, you've got to decide, what do you prefer? Do you prefer a little softer? Now do you see almost that horizontal line coming right there? Or do you prefer it a little bit softer? This is a much harder line, falls a little bit different, and it'll do it all the way to the back. Now I would just point, this is called point cutting. I would point cut that away, but you can definitely see that hard line right there. Where on the other side, It lays much softer and actually looks even longer, and it is longer because we cut it at this angle. The other one, we cut it at this angle, which would take that much off. You see that? Kind of curves up. So that's the math part of this. That's the geometry part of it. Do they want this or do they want that? Once you get experienced with haircutting, it starts making sense to you. So as I bring this forward, I want you to see it's all one length right now, but do you see that line coming in? Do you see how that would eventually V out? Where this longest point would travel to that spot and become a V. Where you're going to have a situation is going to be this corner right here, and I'll show it to you as we do it. So I'm going to bring that forward, bring it exactly the same way. This is called a graduated cut. It is a stationary guide, and there's nothing to cut because, nope, nothing to cut. So then I'm not going to take this any shorter because I want to use this mannequin for other stuff. But what that would do is, again, you would see even more of that line. And if I did it on the other side, you'd start seeing, let me see if it does it on the other side, see if it, because that is looking just a bit shorter. Let me see if that comes over to be horizontal. Nope, it also runs out of hair. Nothing there. So that's what happens when, with the mannequins. Are you going to be able to get it? Maybe, maybe not. But you've learned two variables on taking diagonal parts. This is a round head, holding it vertically to create that V or that graduated cut. If you wanted a little weightier, a little heavier maybe, that's when you would cut it like you're cutting bangs horizontally. And by the way, many times when I cut bangs, I do cut them vertically. Because what happens then is it travels around the head as opposed to coming across, and looks a lot more natural, just as this does, than this does. All right, I hope this kind of helped you a little bit on being able to determine this cut. How much time do we have, cameraman?
12 minutes.
12 minutes? Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do, students, we've done the stationary, coming forward at the frontal area, with staying within the center head, and the nose, the tip of the nose becomes your guide on how to hold it. You have variables on whether you want to hold it here or there. We're not going to worry about going shorter, but what I am going to show you is like on the zero haircut that we did, and I'm only going to do the back to give you an idea what happens when you don't bring it around. When you just bring it straight back, and you don't, you're not careful about traveling around the head form to create that zero haircut. So I'm going to just take it, I'm going to take a tip of the ear to tip of the ear horizontally right here and clean that up a bit. All right, so I'm going to show you what happens when you do bring it to the center. So this is also going to include the A-line haircut. Plus A-line. A-line information, all right? So how do you create an A-line? An A-line can be really long and it can be really, really short. When you get it really short, that's when your angle changes a bit. What we're going to do here is I'm going to create a guide. I'm going to tilt her forward. And I know I have a lot of hair, so I'm going to tilt her forward. Hopefully she's straight. I'm going to wet her down. And I want you to get a variable on an A-line haircut, like I said. And we'll be doing this haircut again shorter before we start our clipper work and stuff. So I'm only going to take off, and I don't want you taking off this much, but I'm taking off this much because I want you to see what happens. I'm going to take off about 2 inches. Do the same thing, make sure it's straight right there. Okay, so sorry students, I don't want to stand in front of you, so I'm going to stand over this way for you to see the cut. Okay, So there, we've got that. Now, this hair comes over to the center. You see it? I bring it all the way over. There's my guide. And again, I have to stand over this way. Bring this hair over. Everything comes to that line. In other words, the very center of your mannequin stand is where you take it to. Now you'll start seeing, as we do this, now this time I'm cutting towards the center, not away from it, but this hair traveled. So now you can see that it's longer on the sides, slightly shorter at the center, slightly rounded. If I would have taken more off and then directed that, it would be even more rounded. When you bring this down, the difference on this, bringing it down, is that you're going to do the same thing. In other words, you're not going to follow that guide underneath like we did with the zero. This is where it varies a little bit. In other words, just like we had a stationary guide up front, we have a stationary guide in the back. So I'm going to stand over in this direction. I'm going to bring the hair out. I can barely see my guide, but I can see it. Take it off. Now see, that hair is traveling over. I'm not following the hair underneath. So that hair traveled over. And then you're beginning to see it even more. The angle of the cut. That's how you do an A-line haircut. Now again, I'm bringing this way over to where my mannequin stand that holds the mannequin for me is at. So there you go. You have it a little longer and shorter at the center than it is on the sides. You see the angle of that cut. Shorter to longer. Now if I want to go shorter and then keep bringing this over, you'd see it even more. Now here's a variable. I'll do it one more time and I'm just going to leave the hair right there. I'm going to bring it up this time. Right at the center, I'm going to elevate it just a bit. And I'm going to point cut it. Be careful not to cut yourself when you do this. Okay? Now, that's elevated to the exact same spot. And remember, I'm coming to the center. So these are variables that you can do with that. Bring this to the center. And if you know where you're at, and you know where you're going, elevate it up a bit, just like I wanted to. And now, you see some slight layering in that. And you notice now, because shorter moves longer, because we pulled it up a bit, this hair at the parietal line or up at the top or the crown has become slightly shorter than the hair underneath it. Do you see the length difference? It's about an inch difference. But what it does now, because shorter moves longer, do you notice that it's cupping down naturally? It's not sticking up anymore. Know what happens. This, again, is the geometry of hair cutting, not different. So we still have a nice blend in this cut. And she travels up here, down, and then back up again. So if I wanted to even this out, then I would just even it out. I would get rid of this corner to create a little bit more of a uniform look. I'm not going to, I'm going to leave it there. But that's an option you would have. See, short, short, long. I would take this much off. So do you see, let me straighten her up, guys. Do you see that corner right there? Short, short, long. So I would take that much off. So it would still look good. She'd have her layering up front, and she'd have a slight lift in the back. Depends on what they want. So you've learned two different haircuts. The graduated cut or the V cut. That's what it'll end up with if you have really long hair. You bring it all straight up to that one spot. Or the A-line. The A-line is always concentrated. right at the center nape. If you go real short, it becomes something, your subsection, it actually looks like the letter A. So if you ever see a really short A line, you'll see that kind of V or upside down V or the letter A coming up into it, and the rest of the hair cups into that. So this cut can be very long, it can be very short. Same thing with the graduated. You can take the front a lot shorter, create bangs if you want, and still let it travel back to where it rounds out longer. Where you're going to have your problem, like I said, you'll see it if ever you do somebody's hair that has really long hair. These corners at the nape where you have your the area behind the ear, the cowlicks, are going to just slightly stick out. You'll see them. And then all you do is just point cut into them. All right, so you've learned a couple more haircuts. I hope you get this. I hope you understand it. Please watch these videos. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what we've done in it. So that's going to be part of your homework, all right? So good luck with all of us with this pandemic. Never thought I'd have to be doing haircut videos to teach my students. But we're making history, you guys. Take care. God bless. See you later.